What is the real estate advantage of the RIA model? That is today's question on the Transition to RIA question and answer series. It is episode number 106. Hi, I'm Brad Wales with Transition to RIA, where I help you understand everything there is to know about why and how to transition your practice to the RIA model. If you're not already there, if you head on over to transitiontoria.com, you can find all of the resources I make available to help you better understand the RIA model. This entire series is available in video format, podcast format. I have articles, I have white papers, all kinds of things, again, to help you better understand the model. Head on over to transitiontoria.com. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about very specific real estate advantage that comes with moving your practice into the RIA model. Now, you might have listened or watched many of my episodes, and maybe there's certain things you agree with or you don't agree with that I say, particularly when it comes to comparing the RIA model to perhaps, for instance, that W-2 wirehouse model. But even if there's something that along the way you might not have agreed with what I said, I will very firmly and strongly say today's topic, indisputable, that what we're going to be talking about today is more advantageous in the RIA model than it is in that W-2 wirehouse model. And to be clear, this topic that we're going to be talking about with real estate applies to essentially almost any independent model in the marketplace. So that would also be an independent broker-dealer model, basically where you are 1099 and where you are responsible for, as they say, your local P&L expenses. And so it's not just the RIA model, but it generally always applies in most pathways into the RIA model. And to be clear, this kind of advice applies to almost any type of kind of service industry. So whether it was a dentist or an attorney or a CPA or whatever the case is, today's topic will still apply to them as well. But to be sure, if you're in that W-2 wirehouse world and you're thinking about going the RIA model, you will want to understand what this advantage is and how it can benefit you. So specifically what that is your opportunity in most pathways, not all pathways, but in most pathways into the RIA model, that you can own the real estate that you have the office there. Now, easier said than done, I get that. We're going to get into all kinds of details here. But the advantage of being able to get to that point, and it might not be on your initial transition, it might be kind of a phase two. The benefits and advantages are significant over that W-2 model. Again, that's what we're going to kind of run through here. And the main point or the main economic reality of this is because over the balance of your career, you will have been paying, if you were at a wirehouse, there's regional W-2 firms, other things like that. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to keep referring to wirehouse firms, W-2 firms. Make no mistake, over your whole career that you work for those firms, you are paying for real estate. That is part of the value your firm is providing you in return for them retaining part of your fees and commissions that you generate, the payout. And so you've heard me say in a number of episodes, if you are in that kind of W-2 world where you have a payout, you need to calculate the inverse of that payout. So to use very simple numbers, if your payout is 40%, the inverse is 60%, meaning you should mentally think of, because you are the one out there generating those fees and commissions from your clients, that 100% of that comes to you. You in turn, don't think of it as, oh, I get 40% of that. Think of it as I pay 60% of that to my firm in return for certain value that they provide for me. And to be fair, they do provide you some value. They do provide you an office. They provide you technology. They provide you, for better or worse, compliance support. They might provide you some sort of sales assistance. So they are providing you value. Now, not to get off on a tangent, because I've talked about in other episodes, of course, the big question is, are you getting enough value for that inverse of your payout, for whatever that is in dollar terms? Add that up and say, hey, am I getting that much value every year? But that's the exercise you want to do. So part of that, again, to keep using those same simple numbers, if you're getting a 40% payout, and again, it's not that simple because some of that's probably even deferred comp, so arguably you're not even getting 40%. But of that inverse, that 60%, part of that is to pay for the real estate, that office that they are providing for you. Now, they don't give you any sort of itemized bill that says, oh, of that 60%, here's how much goes towards technology, here's how much goes towards compliance, here's what goes to the office. But make no mistake, you are already paying for real estate regardless. So the question is, at the end of your career, if you ride out the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, how much longer you have in your career, and all along that way, you are utilizing real estate by having an office, if that's important to you, perhaps a conference room is part of that, then you are paying for that. You are paying for that in your payout. They are not just giving it to you. You are paying for it. So effectively, and I'm going to use an analogy of buying or renting a house. You're effectively renting that office from them, because at the end of the day, after maybe decades of paying into that, you have no equity in that location, in that building, in that office, whatever the case is, for all those years of paying into the pot. Compare that into the RIA model, where you control your local P&L, where you can buy the real estate, and there's all kinds of advantages to that. We're going to kind of go through some of those in every essentially month, quarter, year, however you want to break it down. Part of your cost structure in that RIA model, again, just because you're in the RIA model doesn't mean you're not going to have costs as well. But when you own the property, you're paying into it, which you're doing anyways on the wirehouse side. Now you're actually building equity. You're paying down a note or whatever the case, and you're building an asset over 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years. And so I'm going to give you some examples of that. So the kind of the simplest analogy I would think of on this front when I talk to advisors about this is in your own personal life, and perhaps advice you give to clients. Do you choose to buy or rent the house that you live in? And most of you, there's always some exceptions. You're maybe in some city and there's some, condo that you're going to rent or something. But in most cases, I would venture to say most of you watching this episode own the house you're in. And likewise, if your clients come to you over time and say, hey, should I buy or rent a house that I'm going to maybe stay in for quite some time, or even maybe at some point move, but I still need another house. Should I buy or rent? Over the long term, most people would say you're better off buying. I get there are some people that say rent, and we'll get into that. But the idea being all the reasons that you have personally chosen to buy a house and the reasons you likely tell your clients to buy a house apply to this same kind of real estate situation we're talking about here. So, for example, a couple items on that. One of the reasons you buy a house in real life is because, as opposed to just paying rent every month, you want to be building equity every month as you make that mortgage payment, as you pay down that note. And yes, there are embedded costs in there, and there's taxes and there's insurance. But if you're paying rent, there's embedded costs. It's just you're not paying them as an itemized, you're paying it to someone else. But the reason you want to buy from a home equity standpoint, buy versus rent, is so over those years, you are building that asset for yourself, not for someone else. So if you buy into that theory, again, I'm going to give a couple of examples here, but if you buy into that theory for your own personal house, why are you not considering that for the office that you are spending years, if not decades, in over the balance of your career? Build equity in something versus just paying rent to someone else the whole time. The next item, as it applies to kind of that buy or rent for your home, and the terminology we'd use with respect to your office is operated leverage. So on your home, what that's referring to is if you buy a house and perhaps you get a mortgage on it, it's a fixed rate mortgage over the balance of the mortgage. Yes, insurance might tick up each year and taxes might tick up each year. But the cost of if it's a fixed rate mortgage, as an example, the cost of that mortgage, once you've acquired it, the payment you have to make each month does not go up over perhaps 10, 20, 30 years. However, if nothing else, because of inflation, the world keeps going up where incomes, or you just grow your practice, grow your firm, that as your income goes up, and yet your mortgage payment, again, except for taxes, insurance, slowly creeping up, but the main bulk of that mortgage payment essentially stays flat. You are gaining that operating leverage the longer you stay in your house, essentially the better deal that original purchase was. That's the same thing with your office in the work environment. If you are at a W-2 firm now, again, you're paying for that real estate as part of the inverse of your practice. You have of your payout. you have no operating leverage. As you increase your production 10%, 50%, 100%, well, yes, you might slowly creep up a little bit in the payout grid, but at some point you max out in that payout grid. And yet, as you continue to grow the firm, you're still paying that inverse of that payout. That you could, just an extreme example, if you doubled or tripled, let's say you grew to the highest payout level, just for simplicity, so no one tries to point back at this. You're at that higher payout level. Let's say you double your production over several years. Now you're twice as big. Well, they're not giving you twice as big of an office, and effectively you are now paying twice as much for that office, because that retention piece that they are taking is now twice as big as it was before for the exact same office you've had all along. Instead, if you own the building you're in, and now granted, yes, if you build your practice large enough and you expand the team and all that kind of thing, at some point, maybe you have to expand the office, and I get there could be costs involved in that. But just as a more simple example, if you grew your practice, the top line revenue, say 50%, just for a simple example, that doesn't necessitate, that you grow the office bigger at all. So you have this essentially fixed cost here, yet your revenue keeps going up. That operating leverage you get to gain from if you own the office. If you're in that W-2 world and you're renting the office, to be clear, effectively what you're doing, and it's based on your payout, and the more revenue you generate, the more the inverse goes into the pot for someone else. You're not experiencing that operating leverage at all. So that's another meaningful thing to think. As you grow your practice, this becomes even exponentially more lucrative. If you own the practice, you have none of that operating leverage in that W-2 environment. Another reason people often want to own a home versus renting a home is the certainty of not having to move, right? If you rent a home or rent a condo or rent an apartment, yes, you have the certainty for the term of your lease. And yes, in many instances, a landlord would want you to re-up, but there's no guarantee that that is an option. And so maybe if you rent it in some neighborhood and you have kids and your family has made friends in the neighborhood, and all of a sudden the owner of that property decides to do something else with it at the end of the lease, you have no certainty. And so I think that's one of the big, the pro renter crowd out there, right? That, oh, renting gives me more flexibility in life and I'm not tied down. It's like, yeah, but you also could be kicked out of your neighborhood that perhaps you love and love your neighbors, and you have no vote in that. And so that is one of the challenges of rent, is no certainty of not having to move. The same kind of thing. If you are in that wirehouse environment, you have no say over what office that firm chooses to provide for you. Maybe over time for cost savings, or they've expanded that branch, or maybe the branch is shrunk, that they decide to move office locations. Maybe that's farther away from where you live. Maybe that's farther away or less convenient for your clients to get to. You have no say in that. There's no certainty when you are essentially renting that office they are providing for you. If you own the building, well, that's your decision. If you've made a poor decision of where to buy the property, obviously that's going to be your responsibility to maybe sell that and find another property. But if you decide, hey, you know what, this location in this part of town, that's good proximity for me and where I want to live with my family. It's good proximity for the bulk of my clients. And if you buy it, you have the certainty that you're never going to be called into the branch manager's office, or the branch manager comes and visits your office and says, oh, by the way, at the end of the year, we're moving six miles to the east. I hope that's still convenient for you, or whatever the case is. So the same reason, the certainty of being able to stay in your place for a home purchase applies, again, to the real estate with your practice as well. Another example, people like to buy a home versus rent a home, is the ability to remodel, right? You can do, when it's your home versus renting a home, if you want to paint the walls a different color, you can do that. If you want to remodel the bathroom, you can do that. You can decorate it however you want to do it, redo the floor, whatever the case is, because perhaps over time, your circumstances change. Either your personal tastes change, you maybe expand your family, and now you have kids involved, whatever. You have full flexibility, right? When you own a house, to remodel it, redesign it, redecorate, however you want to call it, as you wish. In the office situation that we're describing, If you're renting, you have little to you're renting from essentially the W-2 firm, so they are making all the decisions of the office. You don't get any say over that. So the comparable would be, imagine new technology comes along, and we saw that with like Zoom and Zoom rooms, as they say, and being able to set up more automated ways to do video calls with clients. Maybe that's important to you, or maybe there's other things that your clients now want to be able to access. Maybe it's a software tool that is a financial planning tool, and you want to be able to put a big TV up on the conference room wall, and you want to be able to sit and collaborate with that client and look up at that wall together and go over the financial plan. Well, guess what? If you're just essentially renting from the W-2 wirehouse firm, you can suggest those things, but you don't have any vote. It's theirs to decide what they do or don't do with it. If you own your own real estate, you can do whatever you want to it. So again, a big difference between that buying and renting mentality that applies to office as well. And then the final example, this is not an all-inclusive list, is just the tax advantages. So buying or renting a home, buying often comes with tax advantages, whether the ability to perhaps write off the interest on the mortgage, the opportunity to possibly have your property insurance your property taxes kind of set, and then only can increase at some incremental amount above that. So there's a lot of reasons just on that buying or renting a house for tax reasons, it can be advantageous to buy versus rent. This same thing in, again, we're talking about from owning an office. When you own an office, you get all kinds of tax advantages, whether it's the depreciation of the office, whether it's the interest on the note that you have for it, whether it's the cost of remodeling the office that you can write off as an expense. All kinds of advantages, again, that you don't get to take advantage of when you are merely along for the ride, renting from your W-2 firm. So just another example, again, not an all-inclusive list, but I suggest you think hard about why you are probably passionate about owning a home versus renting a home, and yet you're probably not applying that same methodology if you're at a wirehouse. Why aren't you trying to do that with your office as well that you're going to be at for a very long time to come, most likely? So a couple of takeaways just to wrap up here. Again, I could go on and on with different examples, but I think you get the point. So a couple of takeaways. What I'm describing applies to whether you start your own RIA or you could join an RIA. And I've done several episodes on joining an RIA. Now, what's important though is this applies to, you need to join an RIA that's a 1099 model to have what I'm talking about here, where you control your local P&L expenses. That's the key. Is you control the P&L, you control the office you're in. So just know, as I talk about, you go into the RIA model, you get all these advantages. And for many of you, it might be starting your own RIA. For others, it could be joining an RIA. Viewers or listeners of my episodes know I help advisors down both paths. Happy to have that conversation with you as well. But to be clear, again, there's multiple ways you could go into the RIA model where you could still benefit from today's conversation. But to be clear, there are some W-2 wirehouse firms that essentially it's going to be that same real estate scenario as the wirehouse firm. So I don't want to blanket say any pathway into the RIA model gets these advantages, because that's not the case. But if you own the RIA or you're joining one where you're 1099, control your local expenses, you absolutely have the opportunity to utilize these benefits and advantages. The next takeaway I would just say is, don't feel like, oh, wow, I did that. A transition is already a big enough step. I don't know if I can manage trying to buy a property all at once, whether that's for cash flow reasons or just there's so many moving parts related to transition, or it's just too much all at once to do. That's fine. Consider it. I know several people and several advisors that have done this is, hey, go into that space and you can rent an office space or lease an office space. Might be very, very nice. And you might have a plan. You say, okay, hey, maybe we're going to lease. We're going to sign a 3-year lease or a 5-year lease or whatever the case is. And hey, that's just going to be the easier path. Now, I do want these long-term benefits of actually owning a property. First, let me make that transition. First, let me get my new world figured out, with the clients moved over. And then when that lease comes due, if it makes sense, hey, then and at a more measured pace, I can start looking for properties. I have time to do build out if needed or whatever the case is. So don't think, even if you like this idea that, oh gosh, that's way too much to have to pull off all at once, there's no reason you can't do it as a two-step process as well. And then the final just example or takeaway I'd give you And I'm sure there's a lot of these. It's just I happened to hear an advisor express it to me. As I was talking to an advisor here, I don't know, a year or so ago, and he was nearing the end of his career and he's working through his succession plan. And we were talking about, the valuation and whatnot he's going to get for his practice on the way out, his life's work, this business that he's built. And obviously that's a big part of his net worth. But because long prior he had bought the building that he has his office in, which he has just moving into retirement, planned to sell the building as well, he was going to obtain or get just as much essentially cash. He's cashing out of his business, cashing out of the real estate. He was going to get just as much from selling the real estate as he was from selling his business, selling his practice. And so you think about, had he instead all those years just leased an office and not acquired the building, he still had this very nice business, this very nice practice. He was going to make a nice amount of money off that. But because all those years prior, he made the decision and was able to, and again, not everyone's able to do it right away. And hopefully over time, if you want to do it, you're able to put the pieces together. But because he had built that building, he's now going to see essentially double the takeaway, double the assets that he's going to achieve at the end of his career, because he had taken those steps so much earlier. So I encourage you to think about that. There's all kinds of reasons the RIA model may be for you, or it may not be for you. Obviously, that's what I help advisors think through, is how that works. But make no mistake, the advantages on the RIA space when it comes to your ability to own and control real estate is one of the significant ones, both from a flexibility, satisfaction, economics, net worth, however you want to position it. Absolutely worth thinking about as you consider your long-term plans for your practice. So like I said at the top, my name is Brad Wales with Transition to RIA. This is the sort of thing I help advisors with think through all day long of, hey, is this RIA model even right for me? Would it be a fit for my practice? What are the advantages of the model? What are the responsibilities, by the way, that go with those advantages? Real estate being one of those advantages. So that is a typical conversation I have with advisors. Love to have that conversation with you as well if you'd like to learn more about how the RIA model would look for your specific practice. First things first, though, head on over to transitiontoria.com. As I said at the top, you can find all of the resources I make available from this entire series in video format, podcast format. I have articles, I have white papers, all kinds of things to help you better understand the model. Again, at transitiontoria.com. And at the top of every page is a contact link. Just click on that and you can instantly and easily schedule time to have a one-on-one conversation with me. I'm happy to have that. Again, contact link at the top of transitiontoria.com. With that, I hope you found value in today's episode, and I'll see you on the next one.